We want to know, does an animal understand that some other animal might feel what it feels? That it might see or hear or know what it sees or hears or knows? An example of this is the question of empathy. Can an animal understand what one of its fellow animals is experiencing? In humans, this develops only in late childhood, but when it does, it becomes a very strong response. When we see a starving person on television, for example, we don't just say that person has a problem. We can really imagine what it would be like to be in that person's situation. Can animals do that? Mark Hauser describes an experiment that tested whether certain primates can feel empathy.
So you train a rhesus monkey to pull one of two levers to gain access to food. If the animal does this, it gets food, and the only way it can get food during the day is by pulling the lever. So it's basically self-feeding itself. Once it learns its task, which it does very quickly, now you put in another rhesus monkey into the adjacent cage, visible to this individual. Now the experimenter changes one of the levers so that when he pulls it, it shocks the animal next door, and a very strong shot, so the consequences are very visible to the animal in charge of the levers. Here's the remarkable result. The animal in charge of the levers will stop pulling either lever for 5 to 12 days. It's functionally starving itself in order not to shock the guy next door. It will do that more if it's a familiar cage mate than an unfamiliar rhesus monkey. And if you put in, and this is a little bit comical, but not really if you think about it, if you put a rabbit next door, they won't withhold at all. So it's species specific. It depends on familiarity, and it also depends on whether the animal pulling levers has had experience being shocked. They give us a glimpse of that period in our history, sometime between 6 and 4 million years ago, when our ancestors, the early hominids, diverged from the great apes. Or rather, the time when both the hominids and the great apes diverged from some common ancestor. But what was it that pushed us down the path toward high-level consciousness? What put us on the path to culture and civilization, but not those other primates? A lot of psychologists have said it must have been language, but Herbert Terrace at Columbia has a different idea. He says there must have been an even earlier development in our psychology that paved the way for language. He calls it joint attention, the way that one creature can sense that his companion is aware of the same thing that he is. Herbert Terrace.
In children, you can see this develop very clearly. A 6-month-old child will look at a particular object, say a rattle, and just look at it, and the parent knows the child wants the rattle. A few months later, the child will look at the rattle and then look up at the parent and back and forth, indicating, please give me the rattle. Okay, that's very much just what an ape would do. Later on, maybe 12 to 18 months, the child will look at the rattle, look up at the parent, to check, do you see that? And when the parent indicates, yes, I see that, the child will smile, because now the child is no longer interested in the rattle, per se. Could be the car outside, could be the cat. But the child is checking, does mommy see what I see? Is it the same? Now, it's very easy to put the label rattle on that later on, or cat. But first there is this joint attention. And without joint attention, which doesn't require language, I don't see how language could have emerged. Because how do I know that what I'm saying is going to be received by the listener? Unless I have a theory of mind that the listener sees the world in a way that overlaps with my view of the world.
If Terrace is right, then sometime in the last few million years, our ancestors developed this capacity for joint attention, and this special ability allowed us to develop language.
So that many people in the world really get to understand how limited their view if you only take in the ones that survive today.
One came to learn from the words that Jesus shared, and then help another. Others came to kill Jesus for the words that he shared. Evidence indicates the number one cause of ignorance injustice, sickness, and death is politics.
I said one communist to defense plant is one communist too many. One communist on the faculty of one university is one communist too many. And even if there were only one communist in the State Department, even if there were only one communist in the State Department, that would still be one communist too many. The real Joe McCarthy.
Imperative for Zionism, which was made necessary by the Holocaust, was added to after the creation of the State of Israel in 48, and that's between 1948 and 1967. There were very many Jewish communities living in various Arab countries around the Middle East, in Baghdad, in Yemen, in Cairo, in Morocco, and many of the Jewish communities in these places had to pick up and flee, either because they were expelled and deprived of their life or property by the governments that were there in the region, or in the case of a handful of places that we know of, like in Baghdad and in Cairo, where Israeli secret intelligence operations were designed specifically to scare those communities into leaving.
Innocent, a person who has not done any wrong.